Today we're going to be learning Sanhedrin Daf Yud Aleph. This is the Daf for Shabbat Chanukah, and we're going to get started from the bottom of the Daf. Our main topic today is going to be Ibor Shana, which is the adding an extra month to the year. And we're going to talk about different issues that arise. Who is involved in doing this? On what basis do they decide? What are the issues involved? And a whole bunch of other things. So let's get started. Tanu Rabbanan. We're going to start from the bottom of our daf, of the previous daf. You have to be invited. Okay, you can only be invited. Rosh, who does the inviting? Well, the Rashi tells us the Nasi. The Nasi invites people from the Rashi even says mi ba'erev, from the evening before. The person in charge, the Nasi, right, which was usually in Rabban Gamliel, Shmuel HaKatan, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. They were all in the same family. They were the Nasiim. They're in charge. Maseh, in fact, there was a Maseh by Rabban Gamliel. Shamal, Hashkimu li shiv'a la'aliyah. He said, bring me 7 to go to the Aliyah. That was often the second floor. That was where they often did their meetings. Hishkimu matzah shmona. When he got there, he found 8 and not 7, which means somebody was there who wasn't invited. Amar, miyu sha'ala shelo b'reshut. He said, who came? Who wasn't invited? Amad Shmuel HaKatan v'amar anihu sha'aliti shelo b'reshut. Shmuel HaKatan gets up and says, it was me. Velola Aber Shana Aliti, he says, and listen, by the way, I didn't come to do the Ibor Shana, to add the extra month. I wasn't here to be part of the judges to do that. Don't think I wasn't invited. I didn't come tending to do that. I came because I wanted to learn how you do it. I wanted to watch and observe. Marlo Rabban Gamliel was so impressed with his answer. He said, Shev b'ni shev, please sit and watch. Really, every year we should use you for this kind of thing. But, meaning even this year, Ela Amru Chachamim, but he said, look, my hands are tied. The rabbi said, right? Only the people who are invited are allowed to do this, and you weren't. So I'm sorry, I can't help you. Now, this story would be fine and well, except that there's something very strange about the story, which is what we hear after, which is, V'lo Shmuel HaKatan hayat. This wasn't really Shmuel HaKatan, by the way. He wasn't the one who wasn't invited. He was invited, which makes the story a little bit strange. Raises the question, why did Rabban Gamliel not know? Wasn't he the one who invited everyone? And why did, of course, if he wasn't the one, then why did he say this? And then in the end, how did they do Ibor Shana if one of them really wasn't invited and we don't know who it was? So I'll leave all those questions for a minute and we'll just explain them. It was somebody else. Shmuel HaKatan didn't want to embarrass anyone. He didn't want to humiliate the person who really didn't belong. So he said, it was me. And this is, you learn something very important, even the halacha we get here, that you're permitted to lie sometimes for the purposes of not embarrassing someone, which is a super interesting thing in and of itself. Now, so again, we have a bunch of questions. Didn't Rabban Gamliel know? Maybe he did. Maybe he wanted the person to get up and embarrass themselves. And Shmuel HaKatan said, no, you can't do that. And then basically when Shmuel HaKatan left, removed himself, there was no need for the person to get up and embarrass themselves. But according to the Yerushalmi version, they didn't even do the Ibor Shana that day. And that makes a lot of sense because at this point it was all messed up. And Rabban Gamliel did know it wasn't Shmuel HaKatan. And he just played along with it. So he realized, you're right, I shouldn't embarrass anyone. And as a result, he just didn't do Ibor Shana because in the end, there really was someone who didn't belong and who wasn't invited. So again, there's a lot of details that aren't given here, but we can try to fill them in by what makes sense. Okay, let's move on. Now we're going to see that there was another similar story, and we're going to go off topic for a few minutes to talk about not embarrassing others and the importance of kind of putting yourself in with other people that do wrongdoings just so that you don't make people look bad and you don't embarrass people. So, ki hadiyat Rebbe, there was a case where Rebbe was teaching. V'kadarish, okay, he was sitting there teaching the class. Ve'riach reach shum, and there was a very strong smell of garlic in the room, and it was very disturbing. Amal, he said, Misha achal shum yetzeh, that whoever ate garlic should leave. Now, again, this is going to be very embarrassing for the person. Amar Rabbi Chia v'yatza, so Rabbi Chia gets up and leaves. Amdu kulam v'yatzu, and then everybody got up and left. Everybody realized it wasn't Rabbi Chia. And when he got up and left, they realized he's just getting up so as not to embarrass that person, and they all got up and left. Now, what's interesting is, in the end, it was embarrassing for Rebbe because there was nobody to learn Torah with him. Mitzao Rabbi Shimon beRebbi l'Rebbi Chia. So the next, after this, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rebbe, goes to Rabbi Chia and says, Amarle, Atau shetziarta la'aba, are you the one who caused my father so much pain? And, I don't know, yesterday, but whenever he goes to him, oh, right, I guess Bashachar, right? That was in the day, and then in the morning, I guess it was the next day. So he goes to him and he says, you embarrassed my father. Amar lo tehe kazot b'Yisrael. Right? And he said, I wasn't willing to have someone embarrassed like that. That just doesn't go. You can't just embarrass and make one person stand up and everyone will be staring at them. But he's the one with the bad breath. Right here, it's interesting. It's not even wrongdoing. It's just bad breath. Rabbi Chia mehecha gamarla. So now they want to know. Rabbi Chia must have learned this from somewhere. Where does he get it from? Mid Rabbi Meir. Detanya maaseh b'isha achat. He learned it from Rabbi Meir. There was a case. Maaseh b'isha achat. Shabata lebeit midrash shosha Rabbi Meir. She came to Rabbi Meir's beit midrash. Amralo, Rebbe, echad mikem, Amralo, she said, Rebbe, echad mikem kitchani bibi'ah. She said, one of these men betrothed me by having intercourse. That is one of the three methods you can betroth a woman. And she doesn't, right? She basically wants to say, and they're not living with me, and they need to give me a get. So, Amar Rabbi Meir v'katav la get kritut. So Rabbi Meir gets up, and he gives her a get kritut. Okay, now, obviously, he wasn't the one who was supposed to give her the get. But amdu katvu kulam v'natnu. Okay, so he writes her a get and gives it to her. All the other men wrote her a get and gave it to her, right? Even though most of them were irrelevant, but this way she gets the get and the person isn't humiliated. Rabbi Meir mehecha gamarla. Now, where did he learn it from? Go back to our first story, Shmuel HaKatan, because Shmuel HaKatan was before, right? He learned it from him. Shmuel HaKatan mehecha gamarla. Where did he learn it from? Mishchenya ben Yechiel. And now we're going to quote a whole story in Sefer Ezra. If you remember in Sefer Ezra, there was a whole thing that people were marrying non-Jewish women. And then Ezra went again and said, you have to separate from your non-Jewish women. So Vayan Shchenya ben Yechiel mi bnei Elam vayomer leEzra anachnu ma'alnu beEloheinu. We all went against God. V'noshav nashim nochuriyot me'amei haaretz, and we settled among us, right? Brought into our houses these Gentile women. V'ata yesh mikval Yisrael azot. And now there's hope for the Jews about this because people are going to separate from their wives. Right, but he wasn't married to a non-Jewish woman, but he included himself in the group again, as not to embarrass the people that were doing it. Here, this is really wrongdoing, but yet he involves himself with them. Where did he learn it from? Yehoshua, from Yoshua. It's not actually from Yoshua; it's from something that comes up in Sefer Yoshua. It's actually learned out from God. Dichtiv, Vayomer Hashem Yoshua, kum lecha. Okay, you should get up. Lama ze'ata nofel panecha hata Israel. This is after Achan took the shalal, the booty from the war with Yericho when no one was allowed to, and 36 people died in the next war, in the War of the Eye, and they don't know who sinned. So God says to Yoshua, please get up. Why are you falling on your face? The Jewish people sinned. Now, it wasn't the Jewish people. Okay, God doesn't say who exactly. So Amar lefanat, Ribbono shel Olam mi chata. Yeshua knows it's probably just one person. He said, who did it? Amar lo. Now, you would think God would tell him, but no. V'chidi l'torani? What, you think I'm a tattletailer? Lechatel goralot. Go do a goral. Okay, go figure out using a lottery who it was. I'm not willing to tell you. And that's where you see that God wasn't willing to say who it was, because it's humiliating, right? He didn't want to humiliate the person, even though in the end it's going to come out with the goral, but God wasn't willing to do it himself. Some people say it's learned from Moshe. Right now, this is when they sinned with the man, and right when they first got the man, and then God says, but it wasn't everybody; it's just two people. Right, to when are you and collectively talking about all the Jewish people? Me'antem lishmor. Let me just read the whole pasuk. Right, this is also, by the way, God speaking. Lishmor mitzvotai v'toratai. Okay, and basically grouping everyone together, even though it was just a sin of a few. Okay, that was a whole aside about not humiliating anybody. Now we're going to move on. Tanu Rabbanan mishemetu neviim achronim. Okay, we're going to have a slew of brightot today about this whole topic of our main topic. Talk about 1 second. Okay. Mishemetu neviim achronim Chagai Zechariah Malachi nistaka ruach hakodesh miYisrael. V'af al pichen hayu mishamshim bebat kol. Okay, we're going to talk about this is also, by the way, not having to do yet with going back to Ibor Shana. But we're going to talk about we talked about Shmuel HaKatan, and he's going to come up again in this story. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about some really important, prominent people and people who are humble. Okay, they're assuming that this whole thing about not embarrassing someone else, right, it comes from humility also, like making sure that you don't embarrass other people and willing to put yourself out there, even though, right, you're a really prominent person, but yet you're willing to say, I sinned even though you didn't really, or I made a mistake even though you didn't really. So this is all connected, and now we're going to talk about this. When the last of the prophets died, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Nistalka Ruach HaKodesh Israel. There was no more Ruach HaKodesh among the Jewish people. There was no more prophecy. Marks the end of the prophecy time period. But still, there was something called heavenly voices. Right? Even though we learned you're not supposed to listen to a bat call, but there must have been a period where they were still listening to these heavenly voices. So one time they were in this, again, second floor in Yericho, upper floor, and they heard this heavenly voice. Some people have these words, Kim Moshe Rabbeinu. There's someone here who is supposed to, right, could be a prophet like Moshe, or could just be a prophet, period. But what's the problem? The generation is not ready for this. They're not, right? The generation is not appropriate enough that they don't deserve it. So who's that one person? The rabbis figured out it must be Hillel the elder. When he died, they said, Hey Chasid, Hey Anav, Tamido Shel Ezra. Said, wow, woe to this, right? So sad that this Chasid, this wonderful person, and this humble person, right? Pious and humble person. So sad that he died. Tamido Shel Ezra. He was like the student of Ezra, okay? He followed in Ezra's ways. Another time they were sitting in the Aliyah in Yavne. We're jumping some generations. Heavenly voice comes down. I'm not sure, actually. It might be even just one generation. Anyway, Natsnu Chachamim, I didn't check all the generations when he lived, but Natsnu Chachamim et Enehem b'Shmuel HaKatan. Okay, and they looked to Shmuel HaKatan, right? I think before we were talking about Rabban Gamliel the elder, so it's probably one generation, because after Hillel HaZaken, I have to really double check that, but could be then comes Rabban Gamliel the elder, and then from him, that would be the generation of Shmuel HaKatan. But what's the problem? Right? The generation is not, right? There's someone who could be a prophet, but the generation is not ra'oi. Right? So they looked at him. So again, they say the same thing about what a pious person he was, what a humble person he was, and he continued the tradition of Hillel. By the way, we have a lot about tradition on this page because we have the tradition of who learned from who about not humiliating someone, that is also something learned by tradition, which is interesting in and of itself. It's not a halachic thing, but it is sort of a halachic thing. But the importance of not humiliating someone is a very important value that is passed down from rabbi to rabbi. And now we get this whole thing about when there's no more prophets, right? And then who are the people that kind of have the ability to be prophets among the people? And we're seeing this train of, there was Ezra at first who was, right? It was, we have Ezra, then we have Hillel, and then we have Shmuel HaKatan. And then, Afhu Amal B'Shat Mitato. Now we're going to see that he actually somewhat prophesied about some things that were going to happen. It really does seem like prophecy, even though there wasn't really prophecy anymore, but he did prophesy that the following things were going to happen. He said, Shimon v'Yishmael. Okay, Shimon, that's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who's the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the elder. And Yishmael and Rabbi Yishmael lechorva. They're going to die by the sword. This is not Rabbi Yishmael. This is Yishmael ben Elisha Kohen Gadol, and these were part of the martyrs that we know about. Sarahu Ugei Malchut, and he's going to mention a few of them. So they're going to be killed by the sword. Chavrohi lakatla. Their other friends will be killed in other ways. So Rabbi Akiva, for example, with the masrekot of barzel, right, the iron hot combs. And who was it? I'm just going to remind myself. Rashi, Rabbi Chananya b'Sreifa. Okay, he gets burned. Ushar Amalabiza, and the rest of the nation will be humiliated. And a lot of sadness and tragedy is going to befall the Jewish people the Jewish people in the world. Val Yehuda ben Bava. Okay, there was another one, and he, by the way, was also part of the 10 martyrs. Bikshu, but that's not what they're going to mention. They're going to mention it a little bit, but it's not because Shmuel HaKatan prophesied about him, but about him also, Bikshu Lamar came, they also wanted to say this, He'anav, Hechasid He'anav, Talmido Shel, right? Maybe even Shmuel HaKatan. But what happened? They didn't have a chance to do a hesped on him and say those words because he was killed by the Romans, and they quickly had to bury him. They didn't have time to do eulogies, right? When people got killed by the Romans in that way, they weren't able to bury them properly with the proper hespedim, with the proper eulogies. Okay. Now we're back to Ibor Shana. That was all a tangent because of the story of Ibor Shana with Shmuel HaKatan. From there, we got into the importance of humility. From there, we talked about also, right, rabbis who were humble. And also, the beginning wasn't really humility. It was more humility in the sense of putting yourself down in order not to embarrass someone else. And then straight on the issue of humility and how these were the most humble of the rabbis, the people that we mentioned. Now we're moving back to Ibor Shana. Tanu Rabbanan, ein ma'abrin et hashana, elen ken yirtze Nasi. Besides that the Nasi chooses the people, the Nasi also has to decide, give permission to do the Ibor Shana. Rabban Gamliel shalach lito reshut etzel shelton echad shebeSuria. There was a case, Rabban Gamliel, who was the Nasi, went to Syria to get permission, or, okay, it's unclear what he means lito reshut. Maybe he got permission from them, la Ibor Shana. Seems more likely he was going there on other business things. He was a political leader also, besides being a rabbinic leader. And what happened was he wasn't there. Shahalavo. He delayed in coming home, and they were trying to do the Ibor Shana, but he wasn't there. So what do? You need the Nasi, but on the other hand, you have to do the adding the extra month. So what do we say? What happened? Ibur Tashana al Minach Yirtze Rabban Gamliel. They did it on condition. They said we're going to add another month on the condition that when Rabban Gamliel shows up, he agrees with us. And when he came and he said, yes, I agree with you, well, then it turned out the year was already turned into a leap year. Tanu Rabbanan. אין מעברין את השנה, אלא אם כן את הצריכה מפני הדרכים ומפני הגשרים ומפני תנורי פסחים. So you can't add an extra month unless you see one of the following things. You need it either for the roads. The roads are all rained out and ruined, and it's too wet to fix them. Mipnei hagsharim, the bridges are very weak because they're full of the waterlogged. Or mipnei tanurei psachim, where the ovens are too wet, moist, you can't make fires in them, and then you can't cook the korban pesach. So these are all reasons that are going to prevent people from getting to the temple, from being able to bring their sacrifices. What if all the people from outside of Israel are already on their way, but they get stuck somewhere and they can't get through? They're having delays, and they're already on their way. We can delay. But for what can't you do it? If it's just going to be snowy or cold, and it's just hard for people to get there because of the cold, that's not the same as the wet and the rain and what's going to ruin things. And not from people who are in the galut who haven't even gotten up, right? Like couch potatoes. If they're going to be lazy and they're not going to come, well, I'm not going to delay for them. Only if they're on their way. Tanu Rabbanan. Other things. These are the animals from the sheep family, the goats, and the lambs that they use for the Korban Pesach that aren't fat enough. If they didn't get big enough, they're not grown enough to have enough meat on them. Or chicks that haven't yet hatched. Because what would they use? They would use the birds for sacrifices. If you remember, the yoldot, the zavot. People would often bring their sacrifices when they came to the temple for the holiday. So there was a need for a lot of them. And if they hadn't yet been born, then we're going to have a bit of a problem, right? There won't be enough birds to buy bird offerings when the people get there. By the way, a lot of people also brought korbanot olah, voluntary offerings that they would bring birds because it was the cheapest. So they needed a lot of birds for the holiday. So we're not ma'aber shana if we don't have enough of them, or they're not big enough or ready enough for the sacrifices, but we can add that on if we have some other considerations. It's not the major consideration, but it is a consideration. So ketzad, how would you do that to add it on as an added? So Rabbi Yanai Omer Mishum Rabban Gamliel Mahoduna Anachnu. They would say, we announce Lichon Lachem to you de Gozalaya Rechichim ve'Imraya de Arkin. The gozalim are too soft. They're not, really ready yet. And the animals are too thin. The zimna de aviva lomata, and the time of the spring has not yet arrived. So there you see, they added on to an additional claim. We'll talk about this time of the Aviv later because it could mean one of two things. V'shafart milta ba'anpai, and it looks like it's good in my eyes. V'osifit al shatadat taltin yomin, and I'm going to add 30 days to the year. Okay. The main point of that, we brought it, was to tell you about this extra piece that you could add the fact that the animals aren't ready as an extra to something else. But in and of itself, by itself, it's not good enough. But now we're going to actually focus on two other things that you probably didn't even pay attention to in what we read. The first is the 30 days at the end. He added 30 days. Now, Meitivit, this contradicts something else, because remember, that was Rabban Gamliel, and now we're going to see something else in his name that seems to contradict. Kama ibor shana, shloshim yom. Rabban Gamliel omer chodesh. So Tanakama says it's 30 days that you add. Rabban Gamliel says it's a month. Now, a month is usually 29 days, or at least any month has 29 days. 30 is like some months, right? Every other month kind of thing. But if he's disagreeing with Tanakama, it sounds like he doesn't hold 30, so he probably holds 29. And yet here he says, I'm adding a month of 30 days. So that seems strange, seems to contradict. Amarav Papa, Ratzu Chodesh, Ratzu Shloshev Yom. No, what he meant by saying Chodesh is you can either do 29 or 30, whatever you decide. And in that case, you happen to decide 30. Tachaze, now we're going to point out something else from what he said, and it's going to take us a little while to see where they're going. Tachaze ma'ika ben kifai, turning now to Amubet, Hadamai la'anvunutai batchai. It was known that the earlier ones, really Rabban Gamliel in particular, was very takif, very strong, very a little pushy, right, and was very strong in his ideas, as opposed to Rashbag, who was known to be very humble. And yet, what they're going to say here is, even right, let's see the difference between the takifim and the anavim, the ones who are right. We go back to this theme of humility, but even the takifim sometimes show more humility than the humble ones. And that's what we're going to see from this story. And they're going to focus on one thing that Rashbag said. I'll even point it out right now, which you probably didn't even pay attention to. He said, after seeing all these considerations, he said, it seemed good in my eyes. That's all he said. Now, we're going to look at a story that happened with Rabban Gamliel, Tanya. And remember, Rabban Gamliel, he was known as a takif person. He only let some people in the Beit Midrash. He kicked out Rabbi Yoshua, embarrassed him, right? He was a very strong, strict kind of guy and not so humble. So yet you're going to see his humility in this story, especially as compared to Rashbag, his son, who is known to be more humble in general. Masib Rabban Gamliel he was sitting on a step. This is like the remains of what was left where the temple was in Har HaBayit after the destruction. And his Sofer, his scribe, Yochanan, was sitting before him. V'shalosh igrot chatuchot lefanav. And he had 3 pieces of parchment cut in front of him. Lefanav munachot. They were placed in front of him. Amar lo. So said Rabban Gamliel to his scribe, Tol igrat achada, take one, uchtov, and write the following. La'achana b'nei Galilee la'ah, u'la'achana b'nei Galilee tata'ah. To my brethren who live in the Galilee, the upper Galilee and the lower Galilee. Shlomchen yiskeh, you should be in peace. Mahodon anachnu, we're announcing to you, lechon, right? Anachnu lechon, us to you. Dizman bi'ur mata, the time for biur masrot is coming. This is something they would do in the 4th and 7th years of the Shemitah cycle on Erev Pesach. They would do biur masrot. They would say, we finished, you would say a declaration, I took all the maser of everything, and now anything that isn't taken yet, you have to destroy. If you didn't take maser from them, or you didn't give the maaser away, so like it's the end date. He says it's coming because it's going to be Pesach soon, meaning, right, we're standing at this time of year with the time you would add a leap year. So let's see where this is going. La frushe maaser mimatana dezeta, take maasro because the time of biur is coming. Take the maasro from all the olives that are sitting, getting soft, so you can make olive oil out of them. Take the maaser now because it'll be too late once the date for biur maasro comes. And the reason why I was saying this to the Galilee people is because they had a lot of olives in their fields. Vitol igar tachada. Okay, and the period. Okay, what he's basically saying is it's going to be Pesach soon. Vitol igar tachada, and take another one. Uchtov la'achana b'nei daroma, right to the people in the south. Shlomchem yiskeh, you should be in peace. Mahudun anachnu lachon, we're announcing to you. Disman biur amata, time is coming for the biur masrot. La'frushe masre mi omer shibalia, and go take the maser from the bundles that are in the fields of your grains. Vitoli gartachada, and take a third one. Uchtov la'achana b'nei galvata beBavel, write to your brethren in Babylonia. Ula'achana de b'madai, and those in Medes. Ulishar kol gavata Israel, and everyone outside of Israel. Shlomchem yizkeh le'olam, right? You should be in peace forever. Notice he adds the word le'olam here. Mohodun anachnu lechom, we're announcing to you, the gozalaya rechichim, we're back to the thing about the gozalot, are soft, they're not ready yet. Imraya arkim, the animals are very thin, lean, too lean. Vizimna da aviva lomata, and the time of the aviv has not yet come. This is very similar to what his son wrote. Shafra milta ba'anpai, and it looks good to me, so far, same thing. Uba'anpe chaverai, and in the eyes of my friends, my colleagues, meaning he's not just talking about himself. It's not just all about him and I see, but other people as well. V'osifet al shata da yomin tiltin, dilma, yomin taltin, yomin taltin, dilma batar da abruhu. Yomin tiltin, period. So he said, and I'm adding on to the year another 30 days. So just like his son, but you see, even though Rashbag was known to be more humble, Rabban Gamliel was so humble in this, more humble than Rabban Gamliel, because he didn't say just, it looks to me, but it looks to me and my colleagues. To which the Gemara kind of needs an answer, like, how can you explain this? He was known to be so takif, to which they answered, Dilma Batarta Avruhu. Maybe this was after the whole story with Rabbi Yoshua, when they actually kicked him out from being the Nasi, being the head of the Beit Midrash, and they kicked him out, and then he had to go back with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, going once every 4 weeks, and could be he learned his lesson and became more humble after that. I just want to point out a literary thing. They use the term avruhu, like ibor shana. It's the same root, even though it doesn't mean the same thing here. But they passed over him, moved him out of his job, having to do also with the ibor shana. So they use the same terminology. Okay, another braita, because I said today is all braitot telling us from the Tanaitic period all sorts of things about ibor shana. There's three things we take into consideration. Al ha'aviv, okay, about. Now, the aviv usually think of as spring, but what it really means is they take the crops, the grains, and they see if they're ripe. Val perot ha'ilan, and the fruits of the tree to see if they're ripe. Okay, why do you need the grains to be ripe? Because you have to bring the korban ha'omer on the new crop, and it has to be ready. The second thing is the perot ha'ilan, because they have to be ripe for the bikurim coming up in Shavuot. Ve'alat kufa, and on the equinox, we have to make sure that both Pesach happens after when the spring starts after May 22nd, and that or starting from May 22nd, and that Sukkot is going to have to be after September 22nd. So that always has to happen after the equinox, right? The change of the seasons. So if that's not going to be, because this is exactly right, connecting the solar calendar or the lunar calendar, right? Our calendar is a lunar calendar, but also fixed by the solar calendar. And that's because it says it has to be in Chodesh Aviv, right, for Pesach. So we have three considerations. We go by the majority, and this connects with, in general, the whole thing of majority rules in a court, right? So we go by the majority of two of the three. So if two of the three are late, then we'll add another month. But if it's only one, then no. Now, if the crops are delayed, everybody's happy. What it really means, everybody's happy, means if that's one of the considerations and they were delayed, then it's good for people, because if it's not ripe, then they don't have anything to bring for the korban ha'omer yet, and they're not ready to eat the korban ha'omer anyway, the new crops. And let's remember, the korban ha'omer permits everybody to eat from the new crops. Before that, you're not allowed to eat from what's called chadash asor min Torah, and right, the new crop is forbidden. So what they're really saying is, if Aviv is not one of them and it's the other two, and the crops are ready, it's not good. People aren't happy. Why are they not happy? Number one, they have to push everything off for they can't eat the new crop yet, and also they would often take from there and use it in the temple. So if it dries up by then, we're going to talk later about if it was in Judea specifically, and the Aviv was ready in another place it wasn't, and they had to push off, it was annoying, because then you had to bring korban omer from somewhere else. But that we're going to get to soon. We're not really up to that yet. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer ala tkufa. He says, no, that's really true for the tkufa, not the aviv, or we don't know exactly what he's saying. Ala tkufa, what ala tkufa? So the Gemara gives two possibilities. Ibailu ala tkufa smichim. Are they trying to say if it's the seasons, then everybody's happy, okay? And then as opposed to the aviv, meaning if that's one of them, then they're happy. Because if not, right, then we would say, one second. Right. Ala tkufa smechim, and again, how is this going to work? Because if it's the tkufa is the right time and they push things off, then it's not good. Why is it not good? Because if they push Sukkot off too late, it's going to end up in the rainy season, and everyone's going to have to come to the temple when it's pouring rain in the winter. So if the tkufa is not one of them, people are going to be very unhappy, particularly when it comes to Sukkot. Next, or so the other option is, or alat kufa ma'abrin. Maybe remember it said the line before that was on two of these issues we do the ibor, one of them no. But maybe what Rashbag is saying is on the tkufa that can be just the only consideration, and that's a possibility. And the answer is teku. We don't know really what he meant. Tanu Rabbanan, another braita that has to do with this, and now we'll get to what I said about Judea. There's three areas that we take into consideration: Yehuda, ve'ever hayarden, va'galil. Judea, the part on the other side of the Jordan, the Transjordan, and the Galilee. Again, we do this consideration: 2 out of 3. Since the Omer comes from Yehuda, if Yehuda is the reason, then everyone's happy. If it's not, and everything's ready in Yehuda and that in Judea, and this is what we were saying before, it's going to create a problem because everything's ready and they're not going to be able to bring the sacrifice, and they're going to have to, number one, wait till they can eat Chadash in Judea, and they're going to have to also bring the Omer from somewhere else because this new crop is already going to be dried out by the time the next month comes in and it's Pesach. And when they bring the Omer. Tanu Rabbanan, Aim Abrinit Hashanim Ele Yehuda. Now we talk about where did they do this. So we talked about who. Okay, it's a good time for review. We're almost near the end. Who does it, right? People have to be invited. The Nasi has to approve, right? We got on a sidetrack all about the humility. Then we got back to what are all the considerations, and that's what we've been discussing until now, really. The animals, is that a consideration? What about the fruits and the grains and the time of year, the seasons, and how we factor all those things, locations. Now we're going to talk about where you would do Ibor Shana. The ideal place to do it is in Judea. But there were sometimes they couldn't do it there because the Jews weren't allowed to, or the Jews weren't allowed to be there. If you do it in the Galilee, it's fine. But he says no, it doesn't work in the Galilee. Hanania ben Ono says it doesn't work. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bered Rabbi Shimon ben Pasi. So Rabbi Yehuda says, in the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pasi, my tamid chanina ish ono. Why did he say that? Amar kra l'shachnoti d'shu ubata shama. Okay, this is a pasuk in Dvarim, chapter 12, verse 5. You should come to the place where God chose from all the shvatim, all the tribes, to l'sumat shmosham, to be his name, to be there. L'shachnoti d'shu. You should beseech God where in his dwelling place. So what do you see here? Kol drisha shata doresh. Any question you ask, or kind of, this is like sort of like asking a question. Any big thing that you do, like adding another year, is ela b'shcheno shel makom, or shcheno shel makom, only in the place where God dwells. Tanu Rabbanan, another braita. And this is the final topic for today. What time of day would they do it? Only during the day. If you did it at night, it doesn't work. Why is that? We'll see soon. Even Kiddush HaChodesh, determining when the new moon is, they would only do during the day. And if they did it at night, it wouldn't be sanctified, wouldn't be effective. Amar Rabbi Abba, Ma'ikra, where do we get this from? Blow the shofar. This is a pasuk from Tehillim. Blow the shofar on the Chodesh. Okay, this is a reference to the new month. Bekesel Yom Chagenu, when it's covered, right? That's when the holiday is going to be, meaning the new month. They learn this must be Rosh Hashanah because that's when the moon is covered. It's the only holiday that comes out at the beginning of the month. And it says in that pasuk, Ki chok l'Yisrael hu mishpat Elohei Yaakov. This is a chok and mishpat. What do they learn from here? Ma mishpat bayom av kiddush chodesh bayom. They see this pasuk as a reference to the kiddush chodesh that determine that this is the day that's setting Rosh Chodesh, and it calls it mishpat. And again, connecting back to our topic of Sanhedrin, judgment is only done during the day, and therefore you can only do Kiddush HaChodesh during the day, and Ibor Shana is the same as Kiddush HaChodesh. And there's one interesting halacha that comes out of this, which is relevant nowadays. We don't do Kiddush HaChodesh or Ibor Shana, but if you forget to say Ya'alev Yavo in davening, you have to repeat your Shemona Esrei. But if you forget it in Arvit, you don't, because we don't do Kiddush HaChodesh at night, and therefore if you forget Ya'alev Yavo on Rosh Chodesh at night, you don't have to repeat your Shemona Esrei. with that, we'll finish for today. And I already did the review of almost the whole daf, except for the very end. So we'll leave it at this, right? The last two things I'll review, which is where do you do it? Machloket, whether you could do it outside of Judea or not. And what time of day do you do it? We said only in the day, not at the night, because this is viewed as judgment. And that was learned out from a pasuk in Tehillim. That, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov and Chanukah Sameach.